All right, it looks like we're live. So welcome back to Senate Education. It's February 16th, and we have Holly Morehouse with us with Vermont After School Programs. Holly, thanks for joining us. We are, as you know, you've been following our work as it relates to how to prepare young Vermonters to transition back to school, and their summer opportunities and their after school opportunities are a big part of that. And you saw, I believe, or heard that we have a letter going to appropriations. I want to give credit to Senator Ballant, who during discussions yesterday felt as though we should put summer programs to the expedited fund, given that parents and programs are going to need to get ready, need to prepare for hopefully an influx, and also let families know that these dollars would be available. And so we put in $500,000. And so anything you can tell us around what what we need to be doing to help folks get ready, what we need to be doing as it relates to that dollar amount, if that's the number we should be sending down the hall. Anything along those lines will be helpful. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks for being here.
Great, thank you so much. For the record, it's Holly Morehouse with Vermont After School, and it's great to be back with this committee again. I was telling the chair that I listened to the live stream this afternoon and changed around the order of my presentation to catch up where you all are. You are way beyond the why summer is important data. So the presentation that I sent to Jeannie, it's the same slides. I just moved that stuff to the end, so you still have that in there, but I have rearranged the order so we can cut to right where I think your conversation is. Senator Campion, is it okay with you if I share my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So hopefully you're just seeing the cover slide of the presentation. I have to say, Senator Ballant and all of you making this a priority and thinking about the timing couldn't be more important. I think as a state, we really need to be envisioning summer 2021 as probably the most important for young kids around connection, healing, and learning for both children and youth. And those three words are really, really intentional. There's all the data around learning loss, but there's also the strengthening the community connection, building resilience for youth, getting children and youth together, outdoors, enjoying our Vermont summer, getting through this winter, and being outside again, and then providing opportunities for self-advocacy, exploration, leadership, and so forth. And I really appreciate Senator Perchlik chairing the Universal After School Task Force. I wanted to tag that here as well, because the timing is really important for providing some bridge funding this summer and next school year. The After School for All funds are fully allocated and run out at the end of this year. And the future funding for Universal After School won't be in place yet. So we can't let this, one of the most important summers, sort of fall through the cracks. So your work and that letter that you're working on for appropriations is really, really critical. You've already heard a lot of the data. The other thing that I was noticing in your letter, you talk about access to food. Summer programming hits at that. And actually we work really closely with Hunger Free Vermont around summer programming, because they have found that the standalone food sites for students or children and youth to go get food don't serve as many. They're not as effective as a summer food program that is incorporated into a summer program, right? So where you have the bridge programming, you provide 2 meals and 2 snacks and so forth, are much more successful. So it's a real strong synergy. So I think by strengthening and focusing on summer programs, you can hit the access to food aspect as well. I also think that if we do summer right, you can hit on the mental health and well-being concerns that Deputy Secretary Boucher was just speaking to and sharing data on, and that you all have been talking about. And I was in here just sharing some more of that same kind of data. I think as a state, we really need to think about what our emphasis is for summer. And I think that we can do all of these things that are listed here. There are working families who need to be able to work and have spent a long time trying to juggle complicated schedules. There is learning loss that we see and we know and can measure. There's this lack of connection, especially around our adolescents and youth. There's the access to food, and there's the mental health and well-being. Really where we are as a community, teachers and schools are often maxed out. I know there are still places that we're trying to get schools back in person across the state. So asking schools by themselves to pick up summer programming may be a challenge in some communities. That said, I would love for some of that reporting that's going back to the Agency of Ed around the district's plans. It would be incredible if the districts could be asked by the agency how they're approaching summer, whether they're running it themselves or are they partnering with someone else in the area, what that looks like. And the reason I say that is because that collaboration between after school programs, summer programs, and the school is really, really important. It's important not just for knowing about access to space, but it's important for how to support children and youth and who needs to work on what and what kind of math or reading program and who can teach it and so forth. If we really want to capture some of that learning loss, or at least stem the tide on learning loss. The other point, I think, around parents and families, they are stretched thin and money is tight. So whatever we set up, making sure, which I think is the intent of your committee, that low income and even middle income children and youth can access the services. And then there's also acknowledging that the after school and youth serving field is completely and totally exhausted. Many of them have been running programming in person since March with essential childcare, then over the summer, then with the childcare hubs, and continuing to fill in. So we have a very taxed system at a really important time. So how to leverage those dollars to make sure we can shore up what's currently in place, and then also meet the needs in the underserved areas. Senator Campion, what you said about timing is so important. Any plan we have learned will not succeed if it's not rolled out in time for parents and families to make the plans and to enroll children and youth. And when I'm thinking about a summer program here, what I'd like to propose is that we make sure that every community has at least 5 to 6 weeks of full day programming. There's a lot of research around that. I'm a little bit skeptical of summer programs that don't run full day, that only run for 3 hours or so, because I don't think that they meet the needs of working families, and that causes accessibility issues. Also a little bit concerned about some conversations in some districts about, instead of doing a regular summer program, really focusing on like 2 weeks of tutoring for a subset of kids for partial day. And I understand the draw to that around the learning loss, but I am concerned that if it's only 2 or 3 hours and it's only a couple weeks, that working families won't be able to take advantage of that. You won't have the benefits of the meals, you won't have the mental health, social, emotional learning, and frankly, just the being outdoors in Vermont and hiking and exploring and birding and canoeing and kayaking, which really definitely contribute to youth development and is what every Vermonter needs this summer. So timing is really critical. If we cannot, usually you start planning for summer in the fall, definitely by January. We're in February. We're really strong and facile, and COVID has taught us to be that way, but we got to do it now. We need to know now that programs are going to happen. We need to know that programs are going to have enough money for staff. We need to know what the issue is going to be with school buildings and whether or not programs can run in school buildings and which ones and so forth. We also need to be getting in place training for staff around social emotional learning, resilience. If non-school staff are going to be supporting learning, they're going to need training and connections to the school day around that. 2020, I'm just bringing this up so that we don't relive this and that we learn from the past. 2020 was a real mixed bag. Capacity was about 50% across the state. There were a number of schools that did not want to run summer and in fact did not want their buildings to be used, particularly sort of Rutland, Brandon on down, which made it very challenging for programs that normally used a school building. There was also a lot of delay. And I understand with the pandemic, we were all trying to figure out what to do, but there was a lot of delay in figuring out if a program was going to be able to use a building or not. That caused a lot of uncertainty. And when that uncertainty occurs, parents and families look for alternative choices. Some of also what we happened is not only was capacity down, but sometimes where we had a program stood up, we didn't have the demand to meet it because it took too long and parents had gone in a different direction or families had gone in a different direction. So right now, rolling out not only the funding, but some major state messaging, the same way that the health department did back at the end of the summer about how important in-person schools were for the elementary school students. I'd love to see and would partner with anybody on this, some really strong state messaging about the importance of summer 2021 and what that means. We're already working with Department of Health on some of that and getting guidance out to programs. So we are moving forward. And the Child Development Division has also been really helpful throughout the process as well.
Ms. Morehouse, may I just interrupt you there?
Yes.
Let's just, so with Department of Health, you're getting the green light to move ahead. They're feeling good about where things will be with vaccinations and safety, things like that. So
far, I was back and forth with the Department of Health last week, really around the guidance and what they said is they're expecting the guidance for childcare and summer programs to remain similar to last year, maybe with some modifications, maybe around double mask or something like that. But they are expecting programs to be able to run with sort of that same kind of operational look and feel that they had. So yes.
Okay.
This slide here, Senator Campion, is, last week, when I got your request, we put out a survey to the field to sort of see what they're feeling and thinking. The good news is, so the number of respondents was 74, but it's actually much higher than that in a way because many of the programs who responded run at multiple sites. So it's one response, but they run at 6, 7, or 10 sites in some cases. So I would say this is maybe half the field sort of coming in and responding. So the good news is of those who responded, again, granted, this was not a random sample. These are ones who actually, filled it out. 90% are planning on running. What they are waiting for is that guidance. And we did schedule a call right after town meeting day that we're going to do a statewide forum with Dr. Brina Holmes and the Department of Health for the field around the guidance so they can start to see what the numbers are going to look like. Because that guidance really affects staffing and pods and groupings and so forth. There are some that who decided they're not going to run and some that were sort of, on the fence. My second handout, I did put together the list for all of you by county of what so far in your county has responded. And we will continue to collect data, try to get the other half of the field, and then I can update and send that to you. So you can keep an idea on each of your districts, what it's looking like.
Senator Perslick.
Thank you. Holly, this number 90%, how would that change with funding? Are these people doing it regardless of funding, or they have like 21C or other funding for their programs?
These are people that are trying to run and planning on running, but they haven't figured out necessarily all the funding. So on the right side of the screen is really what they're seeing as the challenges. So over half of them specifically name staff and this was an open-ended question. It wasn't where you just check off boxes and you can check everything as your concern. So I would say it's an even, it's a high rate over. They're worried about finding staff, training staff, programming ideas, and supporting staff. The number of them brought up, would staff be vaccinated or not? That would help them make sure that, staff felt safe and were safe. They brought up burnout and pay. Over about a third of them are concerned about that access to spaces. They're waiting to hear from schools. And they're also looking, to collaborate with schools, particularly if we want this to be a summer that includes, strongly learning as well, right? And some of that connection. So if we can move forward on, and it doesn't have to be the school that runs it, but if the school can be in conversation or assign someone to be in conversation or a couple of teachers or something, that would be great. And then health guidance. So where they're talking about the need for funding is increased staffing levels in order to meet the ratios and splitting the kids up and 6 feet apart. Transportation is an issue if they can have fewer kids on the buses like they did last summer. Safety and cleaning supplies, some are still asking for, and training for staff, supports for staff, especially if they can't do as many field trips and activities as they normally would do out in the community. Running an 8-hour program for 5 weeks, 6 weeks or longer in the heat of summer, not be able to go a lot of places is challenging, right? So, the more that we can send their way around programming and ways to keep, staff morale up and so forth. So funding requests were really sort of in these sort of categories.
Other questions before we move on? Ms. Morehouse. Senator Lyons, I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is really helpful. And I'm looking at your list of the programs that are in either school or community-based. For the school-based programs, are they already built into the school budget or matching funds with community folks? How are they currently funded?
Great question. So
Holly, could you
depends
increase the font on that a little? I mean,
yes. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help. That's good for me.
It's even bigger. You just have to scroll over. But so for instance, if we look at Chittenden County, since Senator Lyons is from Chittenden County, Burlington School District, this Burlington After School Program, they have a 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant. So they have federal dollars already. There are 100 schools, 100 sites in Vermont that have these federal dollars. They're the only federal dollars that are solely for after school and summer. When I look at our landscape and try to paint a picture, there are some parts of our state where 21C school run programs are really strong. Franklin County, Franklin Northwest, Swanton area, Enosburg, Richford, they all have multiple sites, 5 to 8 different schools. North Country schools across the top, I think there's 10 sites that are all funded by 21C. The Sharon, Tunbridge area, One Planet program has 8 to 10 sites down there as well. So we have some strong multi-site systems that are funded through these federal dollars and run by schools. So that would be the case for the Burlington After School program as well. They have funding for all of their 9 schools. However, we have parts of the state that receive 21C funding, such as Wings down in Whitingham, that actually didn't run last summer, got a grant to run a childcare hub in the fall and then turned it down and then actually stopped running their after school programming. So just because they're a 21C program doesn't actually mean that they're gonna fill that full comprehensive need. There's another one in the Catch program. It's Lindenville area that's 21C funded, but they don't have summer as part of their programming, part of the grant. So right now, if you look on the list, they might run, but it's not going to be with their 21C dollars. So it's not a requirement in Vermont that you run that way. Then you have players like Essex Junction in Chittenden County, where it's the Parks and Recreation Department that does all of the after school and summer programming. And if you remember with the childcare hubs, they partnered really closely with the district to be able to offer the childcare hubs at no cost for parents. So that's a really nice, tight relationship between the Parks and Rec and the school district. In Rutland, since some of you are from Rutland, Rutland has a 21C program at the elementary and middle schools in Rutland City. But because the schools decided not to open last summer, it was Rutland Parks and Rec that actually ran the summer programming instead of Tapestry through the schools over the summer, and also ran the child care hubs. So it really, because we are so local control, even in our federal grants, there is a lot of variation. The other players, when I sort of paint the picture of the state, where, the YMCAs play a big role in many parts of the Burlington YMCA around Chittenden County and some into Franklin County. The Meeting Waters YMCA down in Brattleboro is really important, in Putney. Those are important places. There is a 21C grant down there, but it's only at the middle school. And in Bennington, that northern Massachusetts YMCA crosses over. So there is a real mix of funding.
So, thank you. That's very helpful. So it doesn't look like one size fits all. And then in terms of funding, there are going to be many individual differences and needs. I'm trying to figure out the sustainability of this kind of after school program. Let me ask, you've touched on some of my keen interests here. And so I'll just list what they are, and then whether we talk about them today, I don't know. But one is the link with businesses and how chambers of commerce may or may not be engaged in supporting these efforts. I never get a straight answer on that, but I don't expect you can answer for businesses, and all businesses right now are stretched thin, but there are some that have done pretty well. And we're always hearing from chambers and businesses about workforce development and how important childcare and child camps and summer camps are, how important they are. So that's one. The other one is the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, and whether or not you've reached out to them to engage them in any summer programming that might be slightly different from what they have done in the past. And so I did mention the Chamber, the Business Link. Then the other one I think is really fascinating, and I don't know what authority the state has over this because it's all locally determined, but not allowing for the use of a school building is something I think maybe we should talk about. It seems to me that if someone's putting together a program or an organization, I mean, I've done business plans for childcare programs and other programs that are run in public buildings or in private buildings. And I just wonder what authority, if any, we have to open up some of those schools and just say they shall be made available. That would be like,
That's a great question.
yeah. So it's always bothersome when I hear that. It doesn't mean that, I know there's always insurance and liability and everything else, but there certainly are a significant number of schools that do allow for it. But
No.
anyway, that's a little bit of some questions I have, and I can't begin to say how really outstanding your work has been in this area. I'm talking with Holly now. Thank you for your good work.
Thank you. I want to hit the school building one because I would love to have those open. I do realize that it's often for schools, if they're not used to partnering with after school or summer, working around cleaning schedules, like schools often see that as the time to do like cleaning and maintenance and all that kind of stuff. It can be overcome, right? It's that collaboration. So once again, I would love to see, any dollars that we put forward, really, whatever way we can encourage that school collaboration with community partners or, with the after school program, sometimes which is run by the school, that still has to negotiate those things. That's really important. And in many communities, the school building really is the only building. Going back to businesses, two parts of the answer. Part of the after school and summer field are private businesses, right? That are like childcare or for-profit or a gymnastics place that's running a business and not running programming and so forth. Part two, which is out throughout Chittenden South Supervisory Union, is a for-profit business childcare center that's in a number of communities. And it's part of the landscape. It does sometimes bring up questions if we're going to put dollars forward, right, to lower costs. How do we make sure the dollars actually, benefit families and lower the costs and provide scholarships and so forth in those sort of mixed delivery systems. As far as businesses that are not part of the youth serving field, we haven't seen a lot of them come forward to bring this on. The place where I thought we might see more was around the childcare hubs when the funding was there to start up. But even hospitals were very interested in having care on site, really didn't want to run programming themselves. Sometimes they had a room, but they wanted somebody, the Y or a community partner or somebody to run the programming. So that seemed to be kind of the place where that got stuck. And transportation, sometimes is a challenge. It's particularly for after school. If it's if the after school program is not on site at the school, how to get the children and youth there can be a problem. And the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps is great. We consider them one of the 400 or 500 programs across the state that are serving youth, and that variety in programming is also really important. I think for some of those things that you were speaking about earlier with Deputy Secretary Boucher about how you reach children and youth, right? And some of them, a certain type of programming, robotics or something might really speak to them, and another one, we need a completely different angle. And the beautiful thing about after school and summer is that we can provide a lot of different angles, right? We don't have all the children and youth sitting in the same classroom for the same amount of time. We can really spread out and do some of that. So having the Vermont Conservation Corps in this conversation is great.
Ms. Morehouse, I'm just wondering are there areas that we really need to be focused on that have a deficit of kinds of summer programs that kids might need to be enrolling in?
Yes, we do. Barry, Canaan, Champlain Islands, Pulteney, Bennington, there's individual communities that don't have, and I guess when I'm thinking in this conversation, I'm thinking about that comprehensive summer program, right? That's going to run for the full day and the weeks and is going to do swim lessons and field trips and food and learning and social emotional learning and all those things. So there's a number of smaller things, for instance, in Bennington that a lot of arts programs in particular come to mind down in Bennington that will run programming for a smaller set of kids. But, I think having an option that is also multiple week for the same, if we want to hit learning loss, it needs to be the same children every week on a consistent basis. They can't go for 1 week and then move on. We're not going to have any learning gains there. Same with access to food and so forth. So there's definitely that piece of it. So I think there's three parts to that. There's places, like I just mentioned, where there isn't anything like that I can point to, where there's an option that's low or free that provides comprehensive programming. So we have places like that. Then we have places like Essex that's running programming, but typically has a long waiting list, right? So we have places where you can't get in your area. And then we have places where I think that they could expand if we could help with the funding, right? To add some staff and also the messaging, right? There's no czar of summer, right? There's no who says this is what you have to run. So we really have to work our messaging on what works and what's best practice and how do we run it. So,
Yep.
Those would be kind of my three buckets.
So I want to help move this along a little bit because we do have another witness after you. And what I'm wondering, a couple of things. Does the $500,000 make sense in terms of an amount? How is it distributed? And then should there be something in there for people for programs to access to start up this summer, to pay for what you're talking about, the beefing up of faculty and staff? And then thirdly, what are we going to get from this? What is it? What are you going to come back and say, hey, you guys knocked it out of the park, or we were actually $500,000 short? What are the kinds of things that how will young people benefit from those things?
Great questions. So I have two proposals around the funding at the bottom of the slide. One, I just named Summer Connection Grants.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to really build up the existing infrastructure. And then the second component I called Summer Partnership Expansion Grants, which really, Senator Campion, is what you were saying about starting from scratch someplace. The Summer Connection Grants, I was envisioning grants to existing, some of those programs that we saw on that list that need to add staff, they need to add busing. They're pretty good at running, but they've got these gaps and under COVID and this year it's really important. Or maybe they want to hire 2 school day teachers to really support literacy and math. So I'm envisioning there grants of like 5,000 to 20,000. So I just averaged 10,000 a program across 150 programs. It's 1.5 million. And then I put some proposed requirements which you all could play with, or our grant oversight committee would play with, that programming should be low or no cost to parents who qualify, 5 days a week, at least 5 weeks, 8 hours a day, providing healthy snacks and meals, integrating SEL and STEM, outdoor activities, and using qualified instructors. And I think these are the components that would help get us all those outcomes that we talked about up front. And then keeping the funding flexible. So if it's for a bus or staffing or supplies or enrichment or paying for training, I think is important because those programs have existing budgets, have money for some things and not others. And so this would allow them to be able to tell us what they most need. And as Senator Perchlik said, we have an existing program called After School for All that's run through the Agency of Human Services that has a structure in place, has a grant oversight committee, that could put together a funding proposal, application, and have people apply, and we could get this money out pretty quickly.
Great.
The second component is the expansion. I worked with the Wallace Foundation, put together a cost calculator, and I spent some time this weekend playing with a lot of different numbers. For a program that serves about 50 kids for 6 weeks, full day, it's about $50,000. If parents aren't paying anything, if there's no school money, like that's just from scratch. You have nothing. So this second proposal, if you wanted to do 50 of those, that number, the 2.5 million, probably could be lowered if there's existing funds or matching or other dollars. But this gives you, if you're talking about blank slate, if they serve only 30 kids, it's about $33,000 to run a 6-week program. If they serve 200 kids, a big size program, it's about $144,000. So there are some economies of scale for large programs, but most of our programs, I'd say, fit within that like 50 kid range. So about $50,000. I'd put similar kind of requirements on this, to get the kind of outcomes that we want to get, and could run through a similar process. The key will be doing it quickly so that they can let families know and get students signed up. And the challenge will be, working with the schools to make sure the students who most need to be there are there, and that they know what they need to be working on, and there's some collaboration there.
That's great. That's a huge help. Senator Lyons.
Quick question, short answer. I don't want to hold us up. In looking at the, you said you looked at a specific organization or site to put this together. Are there any projected savings that come out of this during the school year? So what is the benefit that we see both? I know obviously we'll see a social benefit and maybe an academic benefit, but are there cost savings associated with this within the school system itself? And by that, I mean, not just reductions, but a decreased rate of increase. Is there anything like that around there?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there are some return on investment studies just on after school in general that were done pre-COVID. And those, are anywhere from, $2 to $3 for every dollar you invest. I think these dollars, and we could work on something for you, and I could try to put something together and get it back to you. I think these dollars are going to have even stronger payout because of the learning loss that happened at the end of last school year, then over the summer with hardly anything, and now hybrid and remote learning, right? So if we're seeing that decline in student learning, not allowing it to continue for another 10 weeks or whatever this summer, right? And to start to remake some of those gains. In a normal summer, teachers reteach stuff from the previous year, right? For 8 weeks or something. I can't even imagine next fall what they're going to be reteaching. But if we can reach those children and youth now, and not only those who are struggling, but also just the whole re-engage, right? And re-entry and connection and learning and all those mental health pieces that we were, pointing to that data as well. I'm not sure how to put a number on that.
Yeah.
But I do know that effective summer programs address all of those things.
That's a great point, Senator Lyons, and something that I'll also put into the letter, just reminding folks, and that this is an investment up front, but it's also savings. It's a great point. Committee, any final questions? This has been incredibly helpful. Unless I hear from Senator, what I'll do is take these recommendations, incorporate them into a new draft, and get that ready to share with all of you tomorrow. Senator Hooker.
Just curious to know how much 21C money we have in this, in the state. And where would we get that?
It's about $6.5 million for school year and summer.
Okay, and if an entity gets a 21C grant, is that likely to fund a whole program? Does it vary? Parts of a program?
It varies. When they first receive the grant, right, they make a proposal and they receive 100% of the grant funding that they're awarded for the first 3 years. And then in year 4, it's reduced by 10%. In year 5, it's reduced by 25%. And after year 5, it's at 50%. And most of the programs that are operating with 21C funding, almost all, now that I think about it, right, wrote their grants pre-COVID. So even though there was some flexibility in how and when they can use their dollars, because there was a lot of things about what was school hours and non-school hours, but that kind of got straightened out. Their grants necessarily aren't larger to meet these additional needs. So I would include 21C funded programs in this funding program where they could apply for the bus or the thing that they need to really make their programs work this summer.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And the Agency of Ed can share tons more on 21C as well.
Right. So we're going to leave it there. We have one more witness and we have a hard stop a little bit before 4. we will have you continue to follow our work. You can please, Ms. Morehouse, look at the next draft when it comes out. Feel free to come back in, weigh in, and I know when our recommendations get to approach, you'll likely have a visit there as well. But this has been incredibly helpful, and looking around and seeing heads nodding, this is the kind of investment that I think we all hope that we can make this year. Great, thank you. Committee, let's just take a 5-minute stretch, and then we'll, Mr. Wolpe, you'll be joining us. Great, thank you very much. 5 minutes.
Senator Campion, do you have a chairs meeting at 4 today?
We do.
Thank you.